I am a big fan of my next guest because he's done something very few other journalists have done, and that is actually go and sit down, talk, meet with, and discuss the intricate social complexities of some of our far-right groups. John Safran is an author, documentary maker. He is now investigating extremists and the radicalisation that's going on amongst white nationalists, ISIS supporters, anarchists. You might remember his 2017 book, Depends What You Mean by Extremist. Thanks for joining us, John.
No worries.
I read out before a list of some of the, without mentioning names, some of the symbols this Australian man appears to have had on his uniform and some of the slogans. What strikes you about the language he's used, both on his, on his guns, his clothes, and in this so-called manifesto?
Oh, yeah, well, the interesting thing about the manifesto is it uses all these words that someone who's an internet white nationalist would use, like things about civic nationalists and attacking boomers, like things that would go over the heads of most people if they read it. Like they'd go, well, why do white supremacists care about baby boomers? But once you're in that world on the internet and you start talking in shorthand to each other, you know exactly what they're talking about. So neither his name nor face rang any bells with me, having hung out with lots of far-right groups a couple of years ago. And I checked with this dude called Andy Fleming, or at least that's his pseudonym, who runs a site called Slack Bastard. And he really gets into the on a granular level about all the far-right groups, particularly in Melbourne, but also across Australia. And this dude didn't ring any bells with him. So I don't think at this point, there doesn't seem to be like an immediate connection with some of the more infamous and well-known far-right groups in Australia at this point. But there's a lot suggesting, he's just radicalised by the internet.
I've heard this phrase, and look, I don't know how much his words are important for his motivation, but sometimes his words are really important, other times they're just revolting. But this phrase that he's sort of a woke fascist, if such a thing is possible. So I guess he's younger than the people we might be used to discussing.
Yeah, well, I mean, another thing about his manifesto, if it is indeed his manifesto, that's interesting, is it's very coherent. So if you read it and you're familiar with how these people talk to each other, he just goes through like the bullet points of what far-right and alt-right people believe in, as opposed to it like being the ramblings of a mad person. But and there seems to be a kind of a millennial layer to him that's like, as strange as that sounds, where like for instance, he kind of virtue signals in his manifesto about all the things he doesn't have a problem with. Like he wants to make clear that he's not a homophobe. It's just bizarre. Like for someone to do something as horrible as this, but sort of like still kind of be concerned with how that, I'm not homophobic. It's just very weird. And yeah, some of the symbols, like he uses this symbol online. He's used a symbol which is basically the Aussie version of that Peppy the Frog symbol that the overseas alt-right people use. So he's kind of part of that, and his humour is similar to that. There's a bit of self-deprecation in his manifesto, like where he jokes about how he's been radicalised by video games, but like the joke is like clearly he doesn't think he has been. And yeah, he really thought it through. Like when I was hanging out with these sorts of people, you had the people who just had not thought through what they're doing or what they're thinking. They're just kind of running on instinct or fun or something like that. And then you have the others who really, yes, they've spent a lot of time at least reading on the internet and have got a real coherent worldview, and he seems to, the suspect seems to fall into the category of the latter.
Do you think this incident's going to mean that Australian politicians stay a bit further away from some of the far-right groups in this country?
Oh, yeah, I reckon. You reckon? I reckon so. I think there was a time around 2015 where, if you framed it well, you could be a mainstream person who's you're framing their kind of their arguments against Islam in this in a way like, all I care about is terrorism and halal certification, and that wasn't toxic back then. But yeah, obviously things like this hopefully makes that kind of talk toxic and makes it unacceptable. But we shall see. I mean, the other weird thing or thing of note is it appears he gave a shout out to subscribe to a popular YouTuber. I've been told not to mention who he is, but there's an incredibly popular YouTube superstar who was embroiled in a controversy where he was accused of being anti-Semitic and being racist. And
he's the most popular person on YouTube.
Yes. And, I mean, this is just my editorial. I actually think the far-right people were attracted to him more because he was demonised as being racist rather than being racist himself. But he basically used, like, South Park-style humour, which was interpreted, around Hitler and stuff like that, which some people interpreted as sincerely anti-Semitic. And so then got in a lot of trouble for that. And then a lot of alt-right and white supremacists, because he got into a lot of trouble, decided to use him as a bit of a totem. And so it's just absolutely bizarre, this meme on the internet, which subscribed to blah, blah, which has become a meme on the internet for these far-right people. That's what he said. In the car before the massacre. It's really strange. I guess there is a bit of a connection if you remember the Columbine massacre, where afterwards you found out that the kids wanted to be like Steven Spielberg.
Hey John, forgive me for interrupting, but the New Zealand Prime Minister speaking. Really appreciate your time. Really good to get your nuanced views on this. John Safran's book is called "Depends What You Mean by Extremist." Oh,